This is Naked Mormonism.
I pledge my life, all that I may have. I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
It's time to find the truth.
And having set our hand to the plow, we will never look back until this work is finished.
Where is the church going?
I have faith that the Constitution will be saved as prophesied by Joseph Smith. But it will not be saved in Washington. It will be saved by enlightened members of this church.
The explicit tag is there for a reason, so if you get offended at what's said, it's not for you. But most importantly,
may you ponder the truths you've heard. May they help you become even better than you were.
skepticize everything.
Welcome to episode 84 of the Naked Mormonism Podcast, the serial Mormon history podcast. Today is Thursday, January 4th, 2018. My name is Bryce Blankenagel, and thank you for joining me. On this episode, we get into part 2 of the interview with Warren Jeff's son, Roy, and hear about his transition out of the FLDS and how he's doing today a few years after leaving. After that, we discuss the death of the Mormon Prophet Thomas S. Monson, and possibly draw some conclusions and parallels when we contrast the two versions of Mormon Prophets of Thomas S. Monson and Warren Jeffs. Let's jump right into part 2 of the Roy Jeffs interview. I'm glad that you are able to sit back, after, 10 years after all of this has happened, you're coming out and publicly talking about things that you experienced, because I think what we're witnessing right now is the death throes of desperation of Warren Jeffs in 2006, leading up to 2008. And I think this is a very terrifying time for people who were members of this polygamist sect, because it was at a time that you were fraught with uncertainty. Nobody knew, including Warren, didn't know what was going to happen next. And it was it seems like I'm getting this tone of an apocalyptic nature of your mindset and everybody's mindset in this commune, that everything that we're doing is just so that we can survive until the apocalypse happens, until rapture happens and we are taken to Zion. And it seems like a very damaging type of perspective to have, and a very repressed and insular type of lifestyle to live in, and not know what was actually going on in the outside world. That it was all of these things that you saw as very instrumental in instrumental steps in the lead up to the apocalypse happening. These were things only going on inside the FLDS group, and they were only affecting the members of the FLDS group. The vast majority of the people in the world had no idea about any of this. Yeah, no, we were completely isolated. We didn't have news media. We didn't have anything like that. So we didn't know, I didn't even know Hurricane Katrina happened until August 2006, when my dad made a slight reference to it in one of his trainings, where he said he went down to New Orleans and turned the city over to Satan, and that's why it happened. Oh my. Wow. Really? So he said that? That's what he took credit. On our side, he took credit for it. Oh. But I didn't even know that had happened until 2006 of August. And that right there, I think, points to the controlling nature that Warren had on the group, because he obviously knew what was going on the outside. The forces that were causing him to send his various families into hiding in different places, you and your mom up into Wyoming, and the reasons why he was moving these people around. He knew what was going on in the outside world. It seems like he was just exerting his influence to make sure that you guys stayed insulated and not connected to anything on the outside, which just shows how sadistic he really is. Yeah. Yeah. We were very, very isolated. And during that whole time where he was on the run, and
it was, I mean, he was out there, like, he was going, from my understanding, like going to strip clubs. Like when he got caught, he had tickets to Disneyland. You know, he had Harley Davidsons, he had Corvettes and Mustangs, and you know, in New Orleans, he was, you know, spending a lot of time on, I think in strip clubs down there. And he would do all of this stuff under the pretext, or under the pretense of, doing it to witness to God with his eyes of how wicked the world was.
Wow.
It's like,
I mean, really?
I would say that too if I wanted to go a strip club and try and make myself feel good about it. I mean, I have no problem with going to a strip club now, but I'm just saying to you know, back then, like, it's just like he said he had to experience, like, he would go watch movies all the time to try and, like, witness to God with his eyes how bad the world was.
I mean, it just, looking at it from the outside, can you see how somebody like myself can just say that he's obviously just a self-serving bastard who he was just living the high life? I mean, he was enjoying life.
He definitely was. He was constantly traveling. He would tell us that the Lord had him traveling to every single state in the United States so that he could experience them and decide whether or not they were, like, rejected of God, or, you know, if they could, you know, potentially have another compound there or whatever. So there were several states that were, like, on my dad's, like, I guess you could say, like, no-fly list. Like, there's, like, Nevada, Utah, Arizona. They were all like, you can't have a compound there, but, like, Texas was okay until they did the raid, and then they were rejected. Just different things like that.
And all of it, of course, were business expenses too, right? I mean, he's out there scouting out whether or not he can open up a separate branch or a separate arm out in this area. And and the church, you guys, the tithing was funding all of this too.
Well, and he was definitely just living the high life. Like, it was all, and everything was in cash. Like, every time they caught somebody, like my Uncle Seth, they caught him with a few $100,000, I think. And when they caught my dad, he had like $60,000 in cash. And there was always like a lot of cash flow, but it was always cash. So they were always carrying around hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't it really the Warren and the organizers of the FLDS cult that were taken down by them basically scamming the government for
are you talking about the food stamp thing?
Yeah. I mean, that's essentially how this all came to be. And then everything that they did beyond that was all just dealt with in cash. And I assume that tithing was all taken in probably in cash as well. So, I mean, it was all taken in cash. They're just operating way outside the parameters of any sort of system of law.
Oh yeah, and we felt completely legitimate about that because, you know, the government was against us. They were, trying to take down the kingdom of God. So,
when you steal from the government, they're against you.
we're justified in breaking the law because they were trying to take us down, and so it was like the whole food stamp thing, all of that was all justified by us because we were being obedient to God, and God trumps man. So,
which I think just goes to show that people can be convinced if they're given the arguments that, sequester away rationality from whatever they're thinking about, that they can be motivated to do illegal or even heinous, immoral things if they are if they're sold that what they're doing is a right thing. You guys taking money from the government was seen as the most accurate or the most correct thing to do at the time because the government's against you. Obviously the government wasn't against you for any reason other than the fact that you were stealing from the government. So I understand if the narrative is swapped or if it's told in a certain way that people who are a member of this cult can see that, what they are doing is completely justified.
Yeah, it's definitely a very convenient way to manipulate everybody into participating in criminal activity.
So tell us more about your walkthrough. Then you were called out publicly that you were not worthy anymore. And tell us what happened after that.
So as I said, I was separated from my mom, sent up to Wyoming, and I worked. I milked cows up there, did a lot of work up there, and then at that point, it was actually I had like sworn off, like I don't know what you call it, like abstinence from masturbating. That's the only way I got to go to Zion. Because I told my dad, like, I stopped, and I did stop. Wow. So I stopped masturbating. But in 2006, I think it was April, like I was just like super tempted. It's just funny to me now because I'm like, it's completely natural. Now I know.
Yeah, right.
I'm so tempted, like I just can't help myself. And I think I got like a alarm clock that had the radio. And so like I turned that on, and I also got access to a phone book, and that was like my porn. I would go through there and find like massage parlors ads that have like a partially naked body, and that was like my porn.
Oh, you were there. Oh, totally. Yeah, I got you, man.
That was I was just like, oh my God, wow.
And you're a millennial. You grew up in the age of the internet. Like that was massage ads were your porn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so it was just so April I started masturbating again.
Oh no.
But the funny thing to me is by June, my dad called, or well, he sent a message to me, a voice message, and I actually still have it. Wow. And he said, thank you for like being obedient, all of this stuff. And then, by June, he had actually called me to another land of refuge right after I'd started masturbating. And then I masturbated on the land of refuge after that. So it's like, I just remember being like, wait a second. I thought he knew everything. But I just masturbated and he complimented me for it.
So hang on. This was like your litmus test for whether or not he's a true prophet, how much you masturbated?
Well, it was just kind of like the first time like a question was in my head. I was like, wait. Is he testing me? Like, I felt kind of gaslighted, to be honest. I was just like, but you said masturbating's bad, but I get to go to a land of refuge. But anyway.
Oh, wow. I mean, so is it safe to say that you were, well, I mean, maybe not at this point, but were you masturbating to try and test God at this time?
No, I was masturbating because I was so tempted, and I had a very, I don't know what you call it, like libido or whatever. I had a very.
You were a teenage boy. That's all you have to say.
Well, there you go. I was a teenage boy, and it wasn't to test God at all. Like I felt like super terrible every time, but I don't know. I was there in South Dakota at that land of refuge, and I masturbated the whole time I was there. And like he never sent me away for it. Yeah, and I only left there when I went to my Uncle Isaac and I asked him to send me away. Because I was just like so sick of being there, being around the people that were there. And
so you asked to be sent away from the commune there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, so what had happened there, that was my first introduction to being on a work crew, or on a crew of guys. And I was 15, had just turned 15 when I got sent there. And I had very little, like before that, I hadn't ever been I had never been around a crew of guys. And these are pretty rough guys generally. Like not, I guess rough in the sense that they expect you to be a man, like man up and tough, and which, I wasn't any of those. And so I had to adjust really quickly. And so my worst fear was being on a land of refuge and not being able to live with my dad's family. And so, I mean, what else would you expect other than for him to capitalize on that? And when I got sent to that land of refuge, he said, you can't see my family. You can't come within like 300 feet of the house. And you have to live with the bishop's family. And I was terrified of that because years before he had threatened that if we weren't worthy, he was going to take us away his wife would lose, my mom would lose her place, and we would lose our places with her. That's what he had threatened before. And so to me, this was just like the next worst thing, I guess, of losing my mom, losing her place was me having to, live with the bishop's family instead of my dad's family. And then, I was 15 at the time, and I was old enough to become a teacher in the Aaronic priesthood, because it goes deacon, teacher, priest. So I was old enough to be a teacher, but my dad would not allow me to become a priesthood bearer, which the whole town became aware of. And I was very, humiliated. I couldn't go to priesthood meeting. And so it was trying to fit in with the crew and being ridiculed constantly. And then there was like some boys there that were my age that would tease me about being the bishop's son. And they didn't realize how traumatic it was. Like I would go home every night crying because I was terrified that was going to be a reality, or that it was a reality and that I just didn't know it yet.
Okay.
And so it was just the combination of all of those things, of being teased about not being my dad's son. And then my dad actually came to a point where my dad was like, you need to go, confess your sins to the bishop. You need to, treat him like a father. And so I was just terrified of that. On top of being teased about being the bishop's son, and on top of all of that, then my dad started telling me to treat, and the bishop there was Stephen Harker.
Okay.
And he started telling me that I needed to treat him like my father and fit in with his family and all of that stuff. And so that's where I guess started being more deviant, because that terrified me so much that I refused to.
Deviant in what?
Pushing it on me. And that's why I asked to be sent away, because I was like, I can't take this anymore. I can't take my dad telling me to, be Stephen Harker's son when I'm not. I'm his son, and I don't, because that was everything to me, was being my dad's son. Because what am I if I'm not worthy to be his son? Well, and
to clarify, you're also getting these commandments from your dad while he was, calling you and leaving you messages from a prison cell. I mean, I can't imagine what kind of psychological impacts this had on you, that you were commanded to treat somebody as your proxy father while your father is in prison for doing what he did. Yeah. I mean, wow.
Well, and I would write to him in prison and just like plead with him, like, you're my father. Like, I don't want him to be my father. And just stuff like that. Like, I was just terrified of it. And I think that, like, kind of subconsciously, like, I don't know. My whole worth was being the prophet's son. And so I was just terrified of losing that. And to me, that was just like the end of it. If that happened. And so for him to try and reinforce that I need to treat somebody else like my father, then I don't know. In a weird way, I kind of felt like disowned.
Wow.
Okay. And so I felt like I needed to take things into my own hands. And he always told us there was always the option of asking to leave a land of refuge. It was, there was definitely condemnation with it. Like if you asked to leave, then, there was like condemnation that came with that, just because like you weren't, fervent enough or whatever to be on a land of refuge. But
of course,
I felt like I could take that hit rather than, not be considered my father's son. And
which is such a conflict too, because you're trying to be the most righteous person you can possibly be to be your father's son, but you also are asking to be released from this land of refuge. I mean, I can only imagine for somebody like yourself who's trying to be a stalwart and trying to not be affected by things that are outside influences, trying to do what you think is best in the prophet's mind, asking to be released from this. I can't imagine what kind of burden you were operating under at this time. Wow. Yeah.
It was definitely a huge conflict, but I had at that point I don't know. I was gradually getting, I was inching more and more towards just feeling like I was a complete failure, which I'd already felt like that since I was, 8 years old, but it was just becoming, for me, I felt like it was becoming more of a reality that I was a failure. Because here I was 15 years old, still not able to, hold the priesthood and all of this, not allowed to see my own sister, my blood sister from my mom. She was there on that land of refuge and I couldn't talk to her either. Didn't get to talk to her for the 8 months I was there.
And there's something to be said about this feeling of failure that you were experiencing as being a bit of a controlling mechanism employed by, a religious cult leader like Warren Jeffs. When you constantly have people feeling like a failure, they're going to strive to no longer be a failure. And when you're somebody who is Warren Jeffs, even giving these dicta from a jail cell describing who is and is not a failure, and you're striving to not be a failure in his eyes, that is a very strong controlling mechanism.
Yeah. And somehow I always managed to be a failure. Even if I prayed super hard and did everything right.
And never masturbated.
So I just really kind of, well, I did keep that up, which I'm grateful for. I just kind of lost the will. To just keep trying. I did keep trying, but I kind of at some point was just I'm just not going to be good enough. And that kind of climaxed when I left, but it was just at this point inching more and more in that direction.
So tell us more, walk us through that. You left, and this happened,
This was when I was 15, and I left 6 years later.
Okay. Walk us through that.
So when I asked to be sent away from the land of refuge, or which it was my dad called it R23. It was up by Pringle, South Dakota, or is, and I got sent away to live with, and that was when I got to see my mom again. Yeah, for the first time in, gosh, what was it? I guess it was about 1.5 years.
Wow.
And that was a pretty emotional experience seeing her again.
I'm sure.
And I actually really liked it at that point. Just I felt safe again. I was with my mom, and my sister was actually there too. Two of my sisters, the caretaker was one of my sister's husbands. So, and she was, my half sister. So from a different mother. And then my full blooded sister was there as well. And it was just basically like us 5, for a while. And I really liked that. I don't know, just something about not having so many people in a family there to I don't know. When you have a family that big, it's so hard to be a family. I don't know how to express it, because I guess you know what it feels like to, maybe I don't know your personal situation, but I'm sure in some way you have you go to Christmas or something, and it's just your family.
Yeah,
and it's just fun. You're just hanging out with your family.
Yep.
And so you know what that feeling is. Well, you never get that feeling in a plural family, but I kind of had that feeling when it was just me and my mom and her kids. And so those were the rare times that I felt safe. And I only ever felt safe with my mom because I felt like she was the only ally that I had there. But at that point, that's where I was sent away to live with her, which big punishment, quote unquote. I was actually really grateful.
Wow. And it's stunning for me from the outside here because, you don't know my living situation. I grew up in a very standard, one sibling, 2-parent, stable household. Yeah. And I had that feeling of success that you had just a very fleeting grasp of very few times. That was just my everyday life. It's not something that I can appreciate when it's something you experience every day the way that you experienced it, because it was something that you had such a little access to. And then when you, for this brief window of time, this is what you were experiencing, you had that feeling of safety and security. I truly cannot empathize with the feelings that were going through your head at that time. It's really profound.
Yeah. And I can remember a few other times feeling it when I was, I don't know, before I was like 10 years old, or back when my mom like had her room in our house in Shore Creek. And we, basically like at that point back then all that, like a mom would have her room and all her kids would generally go to her room, play with her toys and books and everything else. And so that was the other time that the other times I felt safe up until I was like 8 or 9.
Okay.
And so it was, things like that. But, that like I've never, felt that since. Like that's something like it's almost like I find myself sometimes wondering if that's even possible to feel that again. Like I feel like it would be if I was with my mom and like her kids, but that's just something that I feel like, I don't know. I've only felt it a few times before.
Wow.
So that was, I felt really happy at that point to just be with my mom. And we were isolated. We were in hiding. So there wasn't, the rest of the family there to critique us. And it was just us.
But eventually this ended. I mean, this feeling that you had, this brief hiatus you had from these various, I should say, these cult-like aspects where, Warren was controlling you from prison, basically. This eventually ended.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This only lasted maybe a month.
Oh,
maybe.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe. Yeah, probably about a month. Because in April, so I left, I think I left South Dakota in like February. And by the 1st of April, the raid had happened, and there was a whole bunch of people from South Dakota that came to live with us. So that kind of vanished.
And just for clarification, this is 08, April 08, right?
Yes.
Okay.
2008. So yeah, that kind of vanished. And then it was just like, I was in hiding, then I went back to South Dakota for a minute, then I went back to hiding and kind of back and forth. But at that point, my dad really didn't have as much control. The first presidency had more control just because everything went haywire after the raid, and my dad didn't have enough communication to control everything.
Okay.
So the first presidency kind of took everything into their own hands. And, so, going back to a land of refuge and going to hiding and stuff like that wasn't really my dad's call. That kind of went on for about a year. And then the very end of 08, then, my dad, and all this time I hadn't been allowed to talk to my dad on the phone. This is what frustrated me so bad, is he would call the family in South Dakota. He would never talk to me.
Wow.
And he would only have he would say something and have it be recorded, and then they would play it to me over the phone. He would never.
So you never actually spoke with him from that time
until 2008, December 2008. Then he said he wanted to talk to me. And so, they had me, transported down to Texas, and, I went down there, talked to him on the phone, like private conversation. And it was, just more of the same, like you need to repent, blah, blah, blah. And then I says, like, do you want me to stay here? Do you want me to go back to South Dakota? And he says, leave it up for the first presidency. So I asked the first presidency. They said I could stay there. And I was in Texas for that was probably the longest. I guess I was in Albuquerque for about a year and a half. But then I was in Texas until like July 2010, when I had confessed to my dad that I had watched pornography, and then he sent me to Short Creek after that. And just kind of a side note, watching pornography was the first time I found out that female anatomy was different than male anatomy.
This is when you were 17 at the time?
18.
18.
like almost, if it wasn't 18, I was like a month away from being 18. But it was right there.
Oh my.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, what's that? What's he doing to her? Like, oh my God. And
wow.
I was just like, whoa.
And you're like, oh, wow, everything in the world makes sense now.
It's a big shocker.
Wow. If anything, that right there speaks to the psychologically damaging nature of this culture that you were this cultural mold that you were filled into, right? That you had no way of exercising any autonomy outside of. You were not able to investigate what the world had to offer outside of this culture. It was just culture or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it literally was like, it was either you couldn't go investigate into the outside world. There's no way. If you did that and got found out, like you were, it was considered having doubts, and you weren't supposed to have doubts. If you had doubts, then that was like grounds for, consequences. To have doubts was I don't know, one of the worst things you could do. So you couldn't go investigate the outside world. And no, we didn't learn, some of the basic things, like my sex ed came from Pornhub, like things like that. Like it's just,
I mean, and Warren wasn't exactly there to teach you about the birds and the bees with your mom.
We didn't learn any of that.
Yeah. You weren't exactly in a healthy, like American lifestyle with, mom and dad and a couple of kids and a white picket fence. You didn't exactly have that American ideal of what the perfect family is.
Oh no. And you didn't even like know what sex was until like after you were married, and then my dad or somebody would like, tell you what you were supposed to do.
Wow.
Which I'm grateful that never happened to me.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, you broke out before.
Pretty bad.
Yeah, I can't imagine what kind of version of sex ed you would get from Warren Jeffs. I mean,
exactly.
So how did you come to break away from the culture?
After being sent away from Texas, then it was I was sent back to Short Creek, which was considered the ultimate condemnation, especially for somebody like me. That was my dad's, the prophet's son, and to have to go to Short Creek.
So you were going from Zion back to the real world, essentially, right?
Yeah, and in Short Creek, that's where everybody they were like, I don't know. We were the elite. Everybody in Texas was the elite, but we were being the prophet's kids. We were the elite of the elite.
Oh,
and
okay.
So it was a huge condemnation, a huge judgment to have to be sent from there to Short Creek, where all of the common people were. It sounds very, I don't know what you call it.
Elitist.
Very condescending.
Yeah.
Elitist, but that's the way it was.
Of course.
And so I felt I was very humiliated, but I was also, a bit relieved because of some stuff with my older brothers and, not really welcoming me to be there just because of the first presidency. The way that I had been, the way that I came to Texas. So I was a little bit relieved to go to Short Creek, but also very, felt very, I don't know. I was in tears. I drove around with my mom for a while, before I left. And that was just her. I don't know. She reinforced to me that she was my ally, I guess you could say. She just again told me, she's like, I love you. I'll always love you. This was like the day before I left, Texas and went to Shore Creek, and
wow.
We drove around the compound there in Texas a couple of times, just talking. Yeah. But that's when I went to Shore Creek, and from there I eventually got sent to, and mind you, from here on out, or I guess from the time I was 15 or 16, all of the judgments after that was just because of masturbation. So
of course,
then I got sent from Short Creek to go work on one of the FLDS owned companies, construction companies. I got sent down to Gallup, New Mexico, and then traveled around a lot on different jobs, kind of nationwide, just. And then eventually, my dad said no more communication with any of my siblings.
Really?
Or any of the family or your mother.
Can I ask, do you know why, or do you have any idea why that might have been?
I started to tell my dad that, I was thinking about leaving.
Oh, okay.
Me and my honesty, which, I don't know, but I was always telling him my thoughts. And so I was telling him that I was thinking about leaving. And so he didn't want me expressing my doubts or anything like that to any of his family or my mom or anybody that, he felt like I would be, a risk of creating doubts in their minds. So,
okay.
He wouldn't allow me to talk to any of them. And then it gradually got to where I was rarely ever getting any communication from him either. And anytime I did, it was just like, you need to repent. You need to, no internet, and then no driving. And I'm 21 at this point. And it's like, Jesus. You can't drive. You can't get on the internet. You can't, anything. Even just, I don't know, basic things like have a bank account or get paid money for the work you're doing or anything like that. And so it got to a point in 2013 where I just got really frustrated. And that's where I got just, I don't know, almost visibly angry with my dad when at one point he said, I went and bought a phone without internet because he said, we couldn't have internet. So I went and got a phone without internet, wrote to my dad, and I says, look, I want to talk to you, because he wouldn't talk to me for, the last time I talked to my dad on the phone was 2011. This is 2013.
Wow.
And I bought a phone, no internet. I says, look, I want you to call me and give me what, revelation from the Lord yourself. I'm sick of hearing it from Lyle and Isaac and Nephi. And so the next thing I know, he writes a message back and he says, if you don't get rid of your phone, this is your last chance at salvation. And that's when it really hit me. I got so mad. I was just like, are you kidding me? All of a sudden my salvation is completely dependent on this piece of plastic. And my dad lied to me and said that your phone has internet capability and you've been doing bad stuff on it. I was like, no, I haven't. The worst thing I ever did with that phone it was a stupid flip phone. The only thing I ever did with that is call 411. And so it's just that's when I started to get really mad. And I had bought a car as well. And I remember my Uncle Lyle, he was trying to get me to give the keys back up to him. And he was like, see, when you buy a car like this, you realize there's other choices out there. And then you get tempted and then you want to leave. And I'm like, no kidding.
Weird how that works.
Yeah. And then he scared the crap out of me and told me the FBI was going to come chase me down. That was going to get a job, that I was just going to be like a poor homeless guy, and just terrible things were going to happen to me because I was the prophet's son. But if I turned against him and said everything I want, that people wanted me to against him, then I would get everything in the world, which, I said a lot of stuff against him. I'm still not rich. I'm kind of pissed. But
weird how that works.
But so that happened in the middle of 2013, and then it just from there on out, it just more separation, and I eventually wrote to my dad and just like I literally wrote, I demand to be, to go out to a job away from Short Creek because there was just so much like public humiliation. He wouldn't let me drive. So I had to walk, and walking the streets was bad. And
wow.
just so many different things. And, he made me live with a guy named Preston Barlow, and I had to stay in the same room as him. I had to travel with him everywhere. Like I had to be by his side constantly. Because they were worried I was going to do something bad. And I'm 21 at this point. And so I felt like I was being babysat.
Yeah. I mean, you were just a 21-year-old child at this time. I mean, that's how they were treating you.
Yeah. And it was so frustrating. I was so frustrated. And so that's why I wrote to him. I says, I demand to be, to go out to a job site. Like, I'm tired of this humiliation here in Short Creek because there's like so many people there. Everybody can see what's happening to you. And I don't know. I'm just like, maybe it's because I'm a people pleaser or something, but I just wanted to get away from it all. So
okay.
I got sent to a job up in Wyoming, and then like I think I was in Missouri or Kansas. And then Iowa, and part of me sticking around for as long as I did, because I was thinking about leaving for a couple of years, but I stuck around for a long time because I wanted to see my mom again.
Yeah. How long had you been separated from her at this time?
At this point, it was, I think by the time I left, it was almost exactly 2 years since I'd talked to her and about 2.5 since I'd seen her.
No way.
So, and it just got to the point where there was just no prospect of that ever happening.
Wow.
And of me ever seeing her again. And, so me choosing to leave wasn't just like, I don't know. It was like literally, I was never going to see any of the family again. I knew what was going to happen. They were going to disown me. My dad was going to disown me. So it took me a long time to get the courage to do it. And even when I did it, I had to, block everybody because I was so scared they would convince me to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And when I did it, I kind of did it on an impulse just because like if I thought about it too much, I would even talk myself into staying just because I was terrified. Wow. But
okay.
Because I was the one to break the ice of my dad's kids. And I didn't, and that was another reason I didn't want to leave, partially was because I didn't want to be the one that brought, that stigma to his name, like one of Warren Jeff's kids left. And so, it took a lot, but, I was in Des Moines, Iowa, working on a hotel. And I'd bought a phone, and I got the Expedia app, and I found a one-way ticket from Des Moines to Salt Lake. And I just figured, like, I'll go to Salt Lake because there's probably some people there that know me that might let me land on a couch or something. And so I bought a ticket, and I just took off running from the job site in Des Moines.
You did the proverbial buying a plane ticket headed for nowhere in hopes that you could escape this life.
Yeah. And then, it was in downtown Des Moines, and took off running, and I've called it a taxi for the first time ever. And then I went back to the house and passed one of the crew bosses on the way in, ran down to my room and locked the door. I had the cab like park around the block. And then I just got all my stuff and, loaded in the cab and had him take me to the airport. And lucky for me, the flight got canceled and I had to sit there for 12 hours and think about what I'd just done.
What could have possibly been going through your mind at that time?
Oh, I was so terrified. I was just like, what is going to happen to me? Like, and I remember like when the plane took off, this was the first time I'd ever flown like in a jet. I remember flying in a small plane as a kid, but this is the first time I ever flown in a jet. And I just remember being like, oh my God, like my father, cause I still believed in my dad. Mm-hmm. And so I was just like, oh my God, he's going to like, the lightning strike's going to come and like take our plane out of the sky because like my dad knows like this is the one I'm on. And I was just things like that I was worried about, but, yeah, it was, I don't know. It was really, I landed in Salt Lake and I remember like I took we had the long underwear. I guess people out here call them long johns. We just call it underwear, but
the full jumper garments,
the full one piece.
Wow. Okay.
And so I remember taking that off in a hotel out by the airport and just being like, oh my God, I'm so naked right now.
You're going to get struck by lightning as soon as it goes in the trash, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And like they sent a couple of guys up to me to try and get me to come back. And, I refused to do it. And
good.
'cause basically if you go back after attempting to leave, there's a stigma attached.
Of course. You're one of the
yeah, you're the guy that tried to leave once. And cause I'd seen it happen to other people and they never get called on, to be close to the prophet or anything like that. Like, so I was just like, I don't want that to happen to me. I'm just going to stay out here. And then I went down a couple weeks later to get the rest of my stuff in Shore Creek and, all my uncles were on the phone and they had a big conference call with me and telling me how I was going to hell, like all these terrible, terrible things were going to happen to me. And I was just like, okay, well, I'll think about leaving. And then I got in my car and left. And that was kind of the breaking point for me where I just completely broke off. But, and I mean, little did I know that, I feel like I've gone through, I wouldn't say the same amount of trauma, but just adjusting to the outside world since I've left has been a huge, huge thing for me, since then. But that I guess kind of the close the chapter of the FLDS thing. And then it's just like learning everything out here and learning that it's okay to, feel what I'm feeling and, go through the pain of separation and all of that. Learning that that's legitimate and all of that. That was a whole different experience for me. But, that's kind of, I guess in a brief summary, I feel like it could go on for hours, but, that's kind of the brief summary of the whole thing.
Roy, it sounds like you're in a much better place now, and I'm really glad that you're here on the outside looking in, along with the rest of us, just because I think you have an amazingly unique experience, and we're all very privileged in this audience, myself included, to be hearing your story from your perspective, because I think this is something that can be a teaching opportunity for everybody. Yeah. Of what these types of insular religious cults can cause people to do, and the type of mindset and mind processes that are created when somebody is raised up and locked into one of these cultures, and how painful it can be to leave. And I really want to start off by thanking you so much, Roy, for being so open and for sharing so much of your history, because this has really been a wonderful experience for myself, and to talk to you one-on-one and to really get an understanding of what this culture is like, beyond any of the other people who have come out of the FLDS that I've spoken with in the past. And secondarily, I want to ask you in extension now that you've left, where do you stand? I mean, it sounds like you're in a much better place than you were before. Where do you stand on kind of the perspective that you hold about your past, and what do you kind of take away from your upbringing now that you're looking at it from the outside?
Well, I mean, it varies a lot, I guess. Like, because sometimes I'm really angry about my past. Other times I just don't really care. But like I guess the only thing I can be is grateful for the good stuff I did learn, and grateful for learning how I never want to be as a father or as a leader of any sort. And also, like, I take away, like, learning, like, from my mom. I learned so much from her, and so grateful, like, for her. And I guess just, like, it really, like, losing her has really driven into me just a whole nother level of appreciation for her, and realizing how much I needed her after I left, and even before I left. Like, it's just I don't know, like, I guess like angry and grateful would kind of be the angry for, what my dad did so belligerently, but grateful for, like, life lessons I learned, and just things that learning how I should be, but kind of bummed that I learned it in a really traumatic way. Yeah, I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely. And listeners will be infuriated with me if I do not ask this, but have you had contact with your mother and any of your siblings since you left, or has it been just completely cut off?
There's five of my other siblings that have left since then.
Wow.
They're half siblings. They're not from my mom.
Okay.
And I've had contact with them, but never really had a relationship with them. But no, I haven't been able to talk to my mom. And my guess is, like, they've probably put her into deeper hiding, because that's usually what they do when somebody comes out publicly against the FLDS, like I have. Then they usually put, like, the people they love or want to see in deeper hiding, which is kind of a bummer for me. But at the same time, I feel like that I don't know. I feel like I have a perspective that might be a little different from a lot of people that come out, because like now I'm like a liberal atheist, and most people that come out don't turn out like me. As far as, like, my like personal views on the world now, and just stuff like that. But I don't know. It's that, like, it sucks that they put her into deeper hiding. I'm sure they have, but I feel a lot more free in just voicing who I am and what I stand for and stuff.
With that said, I really, once again, I want to thank you for doing this today. Do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to leave our listeners with? Just given your entire experience, given what you've shared with us today, given everything that we've spoken about and things I've wanted to ask you questions about, do you have anything that you want to leave before we call it a night?
Yeah, I think that my whole takeaway from a lot of this is, I feel like that the stigma around polygamy in general, and the I guess the criminalization of it, I don't know, the disgust by the outside world of polygamy, all of the prosecution, all of that stuff is kind of what created this culture where my dad was able to use all of that. The outside world hates us, and therefore, we must be doing something right. And that created the culture that he was able to capitalize on, of secrecy. And I feel like that there really needs to be a conversation about how we are approaching polygamy. And obviously, like, there's definitely like common sense laws, like, underage stuff and stuff like that need to be in place. But I think that just generally the stigmatism around polygamy needs to be addressed, because if it wasn't for like all of this, supposed hate from the outside world, my dad would have never been able to, capitalize on, what he did and get the control that he did. Cause I feel like there was just a culture created there. So my parting thought would just to be to, I guess for people to try and have a conversation about it. And, I mean, it's kind of like drugs. Like, you make them illegal and it just becomes a bigger problem. Like polygamy, if it wasn't that it was illegal, then people wouldn't be trying to do it in the shadows, and then you wouldn't have like all of this, child abuse and sex abuse and stuff. So, and it took me a while to come around to that, because I had a lot of hate for it for a long time. Of course. Just because of what happened to me. But there's a lot of people that have had good experiences with it, and I can't invalidate those with my experience. So, that would be my thing, or my parting thought, would just for people to try and like revisit that topic and like have a legitimate conversation that's unbiased.
I think that's a wonderful parting thought, because this is obviously a highly nuanced topic, and people's lives are sitting in the balance when it comes to these fundamentalist cultures that do embody some version of polygamy, or some version of what we see as atypical marriage practices. And obviously there's not really an easy answer to all of this, because we see so many damaging things coming along with this. And of course that manifests itself in its way of child abuse and sexual abuse of, teenage women. And there are a lot of damaging things that come out of this, but that isn't to say that everybody who has a polygamous marriage is going to have a negative experience with it like you have had. Right. So, I mean, obviously it's very nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a tough subject, but I believe that it's, at least in Utah, it needs to be addressed. But, cause it feels like people have been trying to brush it under the rug, but it's just gotten too big for that now. And it needs to be addressed, but yeah.
Okay. So I do want to ask, if you don't mind, if people want to get in touch with you specifically to ask more questions, or to share their thoughts on what they've heard in this last bit talking to you, where can they find you? Where can they get in touch with you, if you don't mind sharing that?
Yeah. So I am on Facebook. Under just Roy Jeffs, and I have 2 Facebook profiles, and it's the one that has me listed as a rideshare driver for Uber and Lyft. Awesome. That's the Facebook profile I prefer people contact me on. But I do have 2 of them, so if they do want to contact, then they're welcome to over Facebook.
Okay. Awesome. And for those interested, if you want to chase the show notes, you can find a link to the correct Facebook profile. Roy, really, once again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing this today, because this is just so much to process in our time together today. But I mean, obviously this obviously takes a lot of strength and resolve to share so much of your past with in a public forum, on a public platform like this. And I really do want to thank you so much for your strength and resolve in doing these things, and for coming out publicly against the FLDS church, because obviously there are a lot of victims of the culture that exists in this, and it's going to take more education of the populace at large in order to understand what is going on there, and to address these problems in a meaningful and effective way that doesn't cause people to just be thrown in jail, to rehabilitate people out of this, and to educate them beyond what they are educated currently and teach them that a world exists outside of what they experience. And I think that you are one very integral piece in that process. And for all of that and for sharing this with us today, thank you so much, Roy.
You're more than welcome. I'm very grateful you invited me on here, and I'm just grateful to get the word out there. And I'm grateful to be here.
For listeners, like I said, you can go to the show notes and find all of the links we've discussed today. And I will hopefully talk to you in the future, Roy. All right, that concludes our interview with Roy Jeffs. I want to thank him once again for coming onto the show and sharing his unique experience with all of us and speaking so candidly about his personal history. It really is a remarkable story to tell. I want to take a few minutes to discuss some thoughts that have cropped up in just the last 24 hours. I had this episode planned and scripted out, but lo and behold, my social media blew up yesterday about Thomas S. Monson passing away. Now I'm left with the decision of whether to date this episode by talking about a news headline and scrap the entire script that I had planned, or to go with the original plan and essentially ignore this prominent story making waves all over my social media and news aggregators. I've decided to go with the former and use it as a jump-off point to discuss Mormon Prophets and the religion as a whole. I don't know what I can say about Thomas S. Monson that hasn't already been said by numerous news outlets and op-ed pieces that have already been written. You'll find a bunch of them in the show notes. Largely, I don't harbor any condemnations about Thomas S. Monson that I don't harbor against the church at large, and I'm not going to be dancing on his grave the way that I did when Boyd K. Packer passed away when this podcast was in its infantile stages. Thomas Monson was a product of the system of Mormonism. His first job after getting his degree in business management was with the Deseret News, as the church's primary propaganda arm masquerading as a news agency. He was cultivated and pigeonholed to be in church leadership from a young age, and he's been running in blessed circles his entire life. He's never suffered any significant financial hardships, never been in danger of not being able to put food on the table. He's never had to worry about a medical bill going unpaid. He's always had friends in high places to ensure his success. Thomas Monson led a charmed Mormon life. So let's take a quick step back here. Thomas Monson was born in August of 1927. Right there is something worth taking note of. His parents were born at the turn of the 20th century. His earliest childhood was spent during the Great Depression, and he was coming of age at the tail end of the Greatest Generation into the Silent Generation, also known as the Lucky Few. He was barely old enough to serve in World War II, and he only had a brief stint with the Naval Reserve, and he remained stateside for his entire tour from late 45 to 1946. He got his bachelor's degree in marketing in 1948 and later gained his Master of Business Administration from BYU in 1974. And these are all markers of a perfect candidate to become an apostle, especially because his first job was in printing at the age of 12, which he continued after his education by becoming an advertising executive and later a general manager of the Deseret News Press in the 1960s. From all I can tell, Monson has never taken a paycheck from a company which wasn't affiliated with the church. Every single dollar he's made in his life has been somehow connected with the church, with the tiny exception of his Naval Reserve service for barely over a year, from 1945 to 46. He even won Slate.com's Most Powerful Man Over 80 in 2009 and 2010, and he oversaw the building of the City Creek Center, that's the multi-billion-dollar shopping mall, which has just been a cash cow for the church since he cut the ribbon in 2012 with those famous words, "Let's go shopping." You can watch a movie made about him from a few years back, which tells a number of faith-promoting stories. Just search for Thomas S. Monson on YouTube, and it tells of his early church service from being a bishop of a widow's ward in the 1950s and then becoming a mission president in Canada into the early 1960s, or you can check the show notes for a link to it. He was finally inducted into the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in 1963 at the age of 36, and you can hear his voice in the intro to this show saying, quote,
"I pledge my life, all that I may have, I will strive to the utmost of my ability to be what you would want me to be.
End quote. Given during his actual induction speech in 1963. But what does Thomas S. Monson's legacy leave us? He was an apostle during the uprising of New Mormon history, which was sort of kicked off with Fawn Brodie in the mid-1940s, but really came to fruition in the 1970s and 80s. He was an apostle when the church lifted the priesthood ban in the late 1970s under Prophet Spencer W. Kimball. He's been a counselor in the First Presidency since 1985 under Ezra Taft Benson, Howard Hunter, and Gordon B. Hinckley, and finally in 2008, he took the mantle as prophet, seer, and revelator of the LDS Church and president of the Corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the office he served into until January of 2018. For the past year or so, Monson has been rather ill with some form of dementia. People in and out of the church have known for a long time now that this day was coming, and now we're here, and a very smooth transition will take place to put Russell M. Nelson in the office of prophet and president at the age of 93. There are many ways to approach Thomas Monson's legacy. In some ways, the church is more progressive now than it has ever been before, which all happened with Monson as apostle or prophet. The church is significantly more transparent with its history than it was even in 2007 under Gordon B. Hinckley. Monson oversaw the publishing of the church essays, which have shed much-needed light on the church's official stance with complicated issues lurking in its history. The Joseph Smith Papers Project has made more church history records publicly available on the internet than ever before, and historians now have greater access to documents in the church history library than they ever had in the past. I can heap accolades onto Monson and the church about their history in the past half-decade under Monson's presidency for hours when we compare it to how they've approached Mormon history before his leadership. But that's enough condoning, because we can't lose sight of the church's actions which deserve condemnation. During this recent renaissance in church history, the Mormon Church has also been more politically active than it has ever been in its history prior to the 2000s. Prop 8 happened at the very beginning of Monson's administration, and every amicus brief, every lobbying effort, every five-star dinner held between a public official and a member of the Quorum of the 15, every single political move the church has made in the past decade has all been under Monson's watch and leadership. The church has spent hundreds of millions of dollars to exert their political will in concert with every other conservative religious organization out there, in spite of what the progressive populace has seen as morally good. They've thrown their horse into the race with the Obergefell decision, with the transgender bathroom bills in the southern states, with the gay wedding cake fiasco out of Colorado, and those are just the issues the public is aware of. There's no way to quantify or properly understand where the church has thrown its lobbying and political efforts in every case or law in which they've had some vested interest. The church experienced a leak in November of 2015, which made clear their stance on gay couples who were members of the church. They subsequently published a statement to be read in various congregations, which said that children of gay couples couldn't be members of the church until they became adults. Beyond that, the Evergreen organization operated under Monson's leadership as apostle and prophet, and the Evergreen organization has used gay conversion therapy methods, including shock therapy, pummeling an effigy of one's mother, undressing in front of other men, and reenacting childhood trauma to try and turn people not gay. This hateful and bigoted anti-science organization merged with another larger gay conversion therapy center in 2014 named North Star, which it still operates under to this day, holding quarterly firesides in Utah. In consequence of this, the teen suicide rate in Utah has increased by 141% in the past 6 years, and it was already twice the national average to begin with. Gay teen homeless rates in Utah are nearly double the national average. Under Monson's leadership, Bloomberg published their landmark 2013 article, How the Mormons Make Their Money, which had a team of economists estimate the LDS Church's wealth. Check the show notes for a link. They estimated that a hefty sum of $7 billion in non-taxable tithing comes into the church every year. They listed over 100 for-profit insurance and ranching and media companies under the church's control and made the summary estimation of the church's total wealth to be somewhere between $40 and $50 billion. An international company with untold political power and multiple propaganda arms, boasting current membership numbers of 16 million people, all completely free of government oversight because of their status as a religious organization, all of that controlled by Thomas Spencer Monson and 14 other obscenely wealthy white male Americans. The New York Times published a great article about the life and legacy of Monson, and included in it is a picture of Thomas S. Monson and ex-President George W. Bush shaking hands in a very familiar way, for those of you who have gone through the temple ceremonies or know anything about them. This happened right after Monson took the presidency, at the time when Prop 8 was in headlines, and Obama had just taken the mantle of the President of the United States. Now we fast forward from what's left behind by Monson, and we focus on what's been happening the last few months and what will happen in the months to come as the polygamist Russell M. Nelson takes the office of president. Recently, President Donald Trump made a visit to Utah, during which time he was surrounded by a number of the Quorum of the 15. He also met with Senator Orrin Hatch and removed Obama-era restrictions on 2 national monuments in Utah. Nobody really knows what else was discussed or what their meetings entailed. Last week, Orrin Hatch also announced that he will not be running for his senatorial seat again this year, marking the end of his more than 40 years in Utah politics. Orrin Hatch is known as one of the primary authors of the 2018 tax bill, which was just signed into law by President Trump, and Hatch said that he's happy to retire at the height of his career. President Trump wished that Orrin Hatch would run for his 8th term as senator, saying, quote,
"Thank you to a very special man, Orrin Hatch, for the introduction, and that was truly a nice introduction, and I appreciate it. You are a true fighter, Orrin. I have to say, I've gotten to know him very well. I've gotten to know a lot of people very well. You meet fighters and you meet people that you thought were fighters, but they're not so good at fighting. He's a fighter. We hope you will continue to serve your state and your country in the Senate for a very long time to come. I want to especially thank you for the tremendous work in ushering massive tax cuts and reform through the Senate. Just happened, and we have a final step to go, and I predict we're going to be very successful. Talking about massive, massive tax cuts.
End quote. You know, people have known for a long time that Monson wasn't long for this world, and Orrin Hatch's retirement comes at a very convenient time for a vacancy in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Now, I sincerely don't think that the church will be so heavy-handed as to elect Hatch into the Quorum of the Apostleship, especially because he'll be gone within another decade or two. You know, he might not have that many years of effective leadership. But a son or a nephew who's in their 30s or 40s, like Monson was in 1963, when he became an apostle, who would, you know, one day lead the church as the prophet, you know, that doesn't seem too far-fetched to me that a relative of Orrin Hatch, you know, might make it his way into the apostleship. So let's put a little pin in the current state of the Mormon Church and the politics that they've been running in for a little while. Let's put a pin in that for just a minute. I want to speak really briefly about Warren Jeffs to add to what I said back in part 4 of this polygamy series, and when we covered Warren Jeffs and his time running the fundamentalist LDS Church in Short Creek. For those of you who have been keeping up with the show, you know that I traveled to Short Creek over the holiday season to spend a day and a half in the area and meet with some of the residents of the area. I'll have a lot more reporting to do about my experience down there, which will be coming out in the next few weeks or months as standalone segments, and that'll be happening while we jump back into our historical timeline into 1841, you know, back with the original prophet of the LDS Church, Joseph Smith. But let me just share a little bit of information that I gleaned from the visit to the Twin Cities of Hilldale, Utah and Colorado City, Arizona. One line which stuck with me that Terrell Musser said, that was the guy that showed me around town. He said that Warren Jeffs basically worshipped Hitler. We went full Godwin in the very first conversation we had. But it made sense, and he qualified that claim. He said the level of control that Warren Jeffs exerted on the FLDS in the Twin Cities and in Texas and Colorado and New Mexico and South Dakota, it's highly reminiscent of the Second or Third Reich when it came to the methods that Jeffs employed to control his people. In addition to the mind control methods that Roy talked about a fair amount in the interview at the beginning of this episode, Jeffs also controlled the possessions of everybody. The members of the FLDS consecrated everything to the church's United Effort Plan, and that's their communal trust, including their homes, their furniture, their cars, and anything that they got their hands on. During this time, Warren Jeffs absorbed a number of successful companies into the United Effort Plan, and he sucked them dry of all capital and drove most of them into the ground so that he could live high on the profits. Warren Jeffs isn't a very good businessman. And we can continue to discuss what Jeffs did ad nauseum, but I'll spare doing so to draw a line between these two floating points in the ether of this episode. Let's take the pin out of what we were talking about earlier. Warren Jeffs operated within the constraints of the resources provided to him. He was divine ruler over some 10,000 people or so, and he had complete and total control over the government of the Twin Cities. He caused unmitigated damage to the various institutions and infrastructure of the town, and now the people are left with Short Creek being a shadow of its former self to rebuild from all the damage that's been inflicted. Jeffs was able to throw around the capital of the United Effort Plan, estimated at $110 million when it was under his control, to accomplish whatever he saw as necessary or good in his little Reich. Similarly, the Mormon Prophet operated within his constraints to accomplish whatever he saw as necessary or good in the Utah Reich. Utah is moved and shaped by the Mormon Church. They throw around billions of dollars in capital and tithing and the voices of millions of adherents to create and perpetuate a government and populace that will bend to their will and never exert control or regulation over this massive multinational corporation. In that way, I think we can see some interesting similarities between the LDS and the FLDS prophets, beyond simply sharing a core set of doctrine and beliefs. Yes, they are different in many ways, but the two religions may be a bit more similar than many people are comfortable with. Rest assured that if Warren Jeffs happened to have the means and resources of the LDS Church at his disposal, he would be committing those means to lobbying and political machinations just like the LDS Church currently does. But let's take a step back. Thomas Monson was no Warren Jeffs. Jeffs is an abhorrent man with proclivities towards raping young men and women who see him as God on earth. For all I can tell, Monson is worlds apart from Jeffs in many respects. But they are both prophets of God, with people fawning over their every word as if straight from the mouth of God. Just because one prophet commits certain atrocities and another prophet doesn't, that doesn't mean they're dissimilar in many other ways. Both of these religions fall somewhere on a gradient of totalitarian control, and both employ similar mechanisms with different means to accomplish their will. Now, as I said before, I can't personally raise any criticisms against Monson that I don't have of the church at large, because he was, by most standards, a good human being, even though he espoused ideas that were antiquated and bigoted by today's standards. And I should say the obligatory, my condolences go out to his family and friends who are mourning their loss. But what I can raise objections to is the societal loophole which allows people like Monson or Jeffs to become venerated by their respective communities and grants them religious exemptions to do whatever they please under the guise of freedom of religion. And one thing I can't escape where the FLDS and the LDS really strike similar tones is the fact that whatever we see going on at the surface level is nothing like what is really happening behind closed doors. We know some of the most egregious crimes committed by Warren Jeffs, and we know of the most stalwart examples of the Mormon Church spending hundreds of millions of dollars on lobbying efforts. But that's just what catches our attention. What makes the headlines. I can't help but see that there is a Mormonism which operates behind closed doors, outside the scope and reach of any journalist, historian, or average chapel-attending Mormon. The apostles no longer keep journals, using the justification that those journals could be used against the church at a later time. And similarly, I toured Warren Jeff's home while I was in Short Creek and saw with my own eyes the hidden document room behind a bookcase where they kept all of their sealing records. These religions have more power than we could ever imagine. They operate in a world outside of any government or non-government oversight or regulation. They use the influence of insane amounts of money and tightly woven personal relationships with high-ranking government officials to protect and expand their never-ceasing power. And the most insane part of all of this is what the LDS Church has done to the FLDS Church. The LDS have sponsored and condoned the various raids in Short Creek and in Texas. When Jess was taken prisoner and going through trial, a Mormon Utah judge removed the United Effort Plan from the FLDS control, and he instated an ex-FLDS, current practicing LDS attorney to be the director over the United Effort Plan and control its funds. Yes, an LDS person controls the piggy bank of the FLDS Church. What better way to fuel the FLDS persecution narrative that was born out of the 1930s when the two churches excommunicated each other? The LDS Church has so much power over Mormonism, and that power doesn't stop at just the modern-day Brighamite Mormonism. It extends to the government in Utah, the federal government in small doses, and their reach has been spanning to third world countries for the past 150 years in even smaller doses. Let me give you a brief snapshot of what's going to happen in the next few months in the Brighamite Church. I'm taking this from a post on the ex-Mormon subreddit, and it was posted by user FaithfulTBM, and I think that name is ironic. The order of operations for selecting a new prophet falls to seniority with a bit of pomp and circumstance to give it the air of the divine. The brethren will spend the next few days meeting with family and friends to set up the funeral proceedings for Monson, after which they'll convene a meeting in the temple, beginning with a session in their temple clothes, after which the quorum of the 14 will change into regular business attire to continue the meeting. The second most senior apostle, Downland H. Oaks, will move that Russell M. Nelson be set apart and ordained as president of the church, which will be seconded by M. Russell Ballard, who is currently third in seniority. The motion will not be tabled yet, as is customary in these special meetings, but soon after the motion is proposed, another junior apostle will move that it be carried, after which, from Faithful TBM, quote, Nelson will accept this motion being moved with tears and feigned humility, end quote. I thought that was perfect. I just wanted to quote the person directly. After Russell M. Nelson accepts the nomination, he'll choose his counselors, and all three men will be ordained to their positions in the new leadership. After this, the church will announce a press conference, likely in the church office building, to tell the world the good news of the new appointments, and the new prophet will be sustained in the upcoming April conference as prophet, seer, and revelator, when they will call a new apostle to fill Nelson's newly vacant position. Following that, the Deseret News and everybody with social media accounts linked to Mormonism will laud their new prophet, and bios about Nelson and whoever the newly inaugurated apostle is will fill the internet. Then, in another 2 years' time, when Nelson inevitably passes away because he's 93 right now, the whole process will be repeated. When you consider the ages of all of the next apostles who are in line, this whole process is probably going to happen 5 to 6 times in the next 20 years. And the Mormon Colossus will continue to trundle on in perpetuity, ruled by geriarchs who are successively more disconnected from the progressing society in which Mormonism finds itself. It will continue to spend millions of dollars on lobbying and buying politicians. Historians will wax distracted by the next salacious release from the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Mormons in first world countries with access to information will continue to leave in droves, but it won't match the missionary efforts the church puts millions of dollars into in third world countries to continue to keep the membership numbers rising. Breakoffs will continue to happen, and the LDS Church will continue to ignore them until they become too large, and will then do whatever necessary to break them up and take control of their finances the way they did with the FLDS in Short Creek. The world will keep turning. Mitt Romney, nephew of a past apostle, will run for Utah Senate to replace Orrin Hatch. And every Thursday night, you'll see a new episode of the Serial Mormon History Podcast in whatever podcatcher you use. The Mormon religion will keep growing and amassing more wealth and gain the favor of more politicians and presidents. They may slightly move on little issues. Maybe in a few years they'll grant the priesthood to women, but every woman who enters the leadership after that will be a product of this same system, and no substantial reforms will ever take place. The church will continue to cover up any wrongdoing on their part, especially when it comes to child molestation. The variables will change of whatever societal issue the church faces every day, but the same tired algorithms will remain true. Maybe, one day, 10,000 Earth years from now, historians will look back on our little 21st century and see what happened with those pesky religions and ideologies and all of the atrocities committed by their adherents since the beginning of written history. They'll frown on our modern society, with all of its significant problems that we could solve if not for the lack of will to do so. But they'll know which side of history certain groups of people were on. Let's make sure we stay on the right side of history. That does it for the episode today. Just have a couple of announcements to wrap us up for today. We have our monthly NAMO Home Evening that we pushed out to tomorrow. That's January 5th on Friday. We're going to be starting at the regular time, 6 p.m., and we have our very special guest, Weird Alma, who has been making waves in the ex-Mormon community for quite some time now with his parodies of church songs and popular songs that he's been publishing. And he has been nice enough to debut a new song just for the listening audience. So if you want to join in the Google Hangout that we'll be hosting there, be sure to check your email that is associated with your patreon.com account, and you will get an exclusive link to that Hangout, or you can just listen to the stream of the entire Hangout afterwards when it is posted next week. Also, for Patreon listeners, if you want to listen to the extra content this week, it is Marie and my frackin' bad movies #2. We reviewed a very, I don't want to call it interesting, but we reviewed a movie about Martin Harris. It's not that long, but it's full of all kinds of fun. So be sure to check out your Patreon exclusive feed if you are a subscriber and supporter at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. You'll gain access to those extra episodes. With all of that, I want to say we are resuming our historical timeline next week. This is our conclusion of the Clean Cut Polygamy series, episode 7, a divine number that we need to end on. There's still a lot more to talk about when it comes to polygamy. I've amassed a couple of other interviews, and I'm hoping to conduct subsequent interviews in relation to people who I met with when I was in Short Creek. There's a lot more reporting to be done with everything of modern day polygamy, and there's far too much to continue just doing only polygamy episodes. There are other podcasts out there to listen to if you want to just learn about Mormon polygamy. I would, of course, recommend listening to Year of Polygamy by a friend of the show, Lindsay Hansen Park, as well as the various polygamy episodes that have been covered in Mormon Stories. And with all of that said, we will be hitting on polygamy as we continue into the Nauvoo timeline, as polygamy definitely becomes more of a prominent issue and practice within Mormonism, continuing into 1841 all the way through the rest of Joseph's life into July of 1844. So with that said, we have much more to discuss, much more to cover. And if you want to continue to see this show perpetuated and the investigative journalism conducted, you can support at patreon.com/nakedmormonism. Thank you so much. And also, I need to thank people who keep this show going on the background. First off, I want to thank Jonathan Tyndall of the Secular Stories and friend of the show. He sent in his recording that you heard at the intro of this episode. If you want to do the same, you can go to nakedmormonismpodcast.com. On the homepage, you'll see the script, and you can just record yourself saying those lines, and I'll splice your intro into the next week's episode or whenever you send it in. So for this week, thank you so much to Jonathan Tyndall for sending in his recording. Also, thank you to Julie for running the Twitter and Facebook pages. She keeps the conversation going over there. Thank you so much. Be sure to give her a follow at TheRealEmmaHale on Twitter. Thank you to Jason Camo for providing the music used in the show with his permission. Go to aloststateofmind.com to hear more of his music there. Thank you to Andrew Torres of the Law Offices of P. Andrew Torres and the Opening Arguments podcast for providing legal counsel for this show. Thanks once again to all of the patrons, and most importantly, thank you so much to the fantastically wonderful listeners out there, once again, for lending me your ear. Hope to talk to you next time, here on the Naked Mormonism Podcast. preceding podcast is a production of Ground Gnomes LLC, copyright 2018, all rights reserved.